Welcome back, everyone. All Bodies, All Foods. I'm Sam, and I'm here with Ashley and our very special guest, Dr. Charlotte Markey. We're so excited to have her on the show today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Charlotte, we would love to learn more about you. We both read your book. We think it's fantastic. We can't wait to let our audiences know that it exists because it's like this survival guide for body image,
Yes.
especially for young adults. And we know there's lots of audience members out there who would love a survival guide because I know when I was in my early 20s, there was nothing. So I
Hmm.
would have really appreciated something like this. But when I was reading your book, one of the first, I think it is the first sentence really stood out to me immediately. And you wrote, there's so much I wish I'd known as a teenager and young adult. I try to answer the questions I had back then in this book. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder what teenager Charlotte Markey was feeling and thinking back then. And was this a book kind of like a gift to your younger self in some ways?
Yeah, I think somewhat like you said, this is a book I would have really put to good use, I like to think, as a younger person, right? This
Hmm.
information wasn't really discussed, or at least not in this way. And so I guess the general sentiment I had in mind in writing that was just that I felt alone with my own body image concerns.
Hmm.
And I think that loneliness and insecurity and even sometimes shame can just make you feel like it's just you, right?
Hmm.
And in truth, we know, and I know now as a much older person, as a researcher who studied these issues for almost 3 decades, that this is actually really common. You don't have to be alone with these issues.
Hmm.
And there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to think about. There's so much nuance in the discussion of body image. And so that's part of why, this book grew and grew and grew and then had to
Hmm.
be cut back. And it was a project because I think I just kept thinking about not just my younger self and what I wished I had known, but I think it's not a coincidence that I've been parenting kids who were teenagers and who are now young adults as I worked on the body image book for girls and the body image book for boys and now the body image book for life, right?
Hmm.
Because I see them and I see their friends, and we've had a household where I have kids in and out often.
Hmm.
And then I've also taught college age kids now for 25 years. So
Hmm.
I feel kind of in touch with what some of that, you know, suffering, it is suffering, looks like.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially
So,
now, there's like social media. There's so many things that impact body image now that weren't
yeah.
around when I was a young adult. And
Hmm.
I always worry really what social media is doing to our body image. And we'll get to that later, I think. But yeah, there's a lot to navigate nowadays
Hmm.
and just so much exposure to toxic messages.
Hmm. Charlotte, I want to say I appreciate that you saying that as you navigated raising children, you wrote your body image workbook for teenagers and now for young adults. And I have a 3-year-old, and it's so interesting to me to like I hear the messages that maybe I was either taught or that were left out that I had to like figure out on my own. And when you're younger, you don't quite figure out always the healthiest thing. And so I am actively trying to like impart helpful and positive messages really with my daughter. And so yeah, as Sam said, reading your book, I found so many wonderful just like practical tools. It was
Mhm.
so helpful, and I'm very
Oh, thank
thankful
you.
for it. So
Oh, thank you.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so jumping in, I'd love to hear your definition of body image. So if we could just start there. Yeah. How do you define body image?
Mhm.
I take a really broad view of body image,
Mhm.
as you can tell, having read the
Mhm.
book, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of researchers or practitioners will say body image is how you think and feel about your body. And I've always felt like that was really a limited definition because we know body image, I think, is more than that. It's not just a superficial concern. It's not just about physical appearance. It really is more, how comfortable are you in your own skin? How
Yeah.
comfortable are you with yourself?
Yeah.
So it's a core piece of our identity. It affects how we relate to other people. It affects our behavioral health. So
Yeah.
especially in the domains of eating and physical activity. But we also know it's just associated with mental health more broadly, right? So
Mhm.
body image is associated with not just eating disorders, but also anxiety, depression, even substance use disorders. So
Yeah.
I think, when we say we want to support body image, we're not saying we want people just to think that they're pretty. We're saying we want them to be comfortable with who they are so that they can kind of live um, their best lives.
Mhm.
That sounds a little trite, I know, but to sort of just optimize their experience without the insecurity or shame or all those things that a body dissatisfaction, a
Mhm.
life of body dissatisfaction can kind of hold you back.
Mhm. And
That's so important.
yeah, I was going to say,
Mhm.
to add to that, what do you think some like myths or misinformation has been that we've carried with us along the way about body image so far?
I mean, I think my generation or a lot of us who are now parents, right,
Yeah.
sort of in the Gen X zone or millennial zone are, you know, grew up believing that their worth was tied to their appearance so much and didn't know how to separate those things.
Mhm.
Um, and I think now we see a lot of people trying to have a positive body image and trying to embrace those messages, but somewhat confused because they feel like that means they have to feel positive all the time, like the
Yeah.
pendulum swung.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
and that's also a difficult and I think inaccurate way to really frame these issues because no one feels positive all the time,
Mhm.
right? About
Mhm.
anything.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
So, so we want to help people to appreciate that it's not like you have to be at one end of the continuum, that most of our lived experiences are someplace in the middle where we don't want to be dissatisfied or held back, but we're not going to be, reveling in our greatness at all times either.
Right. Right.
Charlotte, is your perspective more about, would you say it's like body neutrality or body positivity? Like how might you describe the way you see a healthy relationship, when someone has a healthy relationship with their body?
Yeah, so I love the concept of body neutrality because it does focus more on acceptance and contentment, and it incorporates many elements of body image that are important, like a focus on body functionality, not just appearance. And yet, I think there's sort of an analogy um, when we think about body image. Like think of it almost as analogous to our mood or happiness and depression, right? Where like we don't want
Mhm.
people to be depressed, and it's great if they are self-accepting and content, but it's even better if they're happy.
Mhm.
And so, from my perspective, if you feel pretty neutral, that's a long way on the way to body positivity. That's
Mhm.
most of it, right? I think
Mhm.
really what's just sort of missing then is that sense of joy in your body or feeling more of that positivity. And,
Mhm.
as a psychologist, I want that for everybody, not every single second of every day, but I think that there's maybe a little bit more than just contentment.
Yeah, like
Mhm.
there's space for maybe even just having moments where you feel positive about your body, and that maybe it's like most things, it's not black or white, all or nothing. It's, maybe
Mhm.
body image is more like our emotions that, feelings come and go and change, and
Mhm.
it's really about being able to just sit with whatever experience you might be having.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I imagine that there are some people in our audience who are listening and they're thinking to themselves, well, this is all nice and everything, but my body image is more about my health. And I want to change my body because my doctor told me that if I lose weight, I'll be healthier. There's lots of messages like that, as we know, out there. And I'm curious, what you might say to those audience members who are thinking to themselves, well, I know that there's research that link health concerns with weight, and I know my doctor wants the best for me. So why can't I focus on changing my body and making it smaller?
So there's a lot to unpack in that question.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to tackle all the pieces of it, but feel free to rein me in if I get off course. So the first thing is absolutely, we should trust our medical providers and believe that they have our best interest at heart. But we also know that most medical providers get really limited training when it comes to nutrition, eating disorders, or even mental health in general. So if we're getting messages from any provider that doesn't necessarily sit right or suggest that weight loss is necessary, I think it's important to also get another second opinion, right? To talk with another provider because, no one doctor can be an expert in everything. So look for the expert if you can find them, if you have access, if you have the means for the issues and concerns you have.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it, I think, is we have to be careful where we're getting the message. The other piece of it is that we know that there's some research that links health and weight, but we also, I think, know, especially from research this last decade or so, that those relationships are just very complicated. And so there's a lot going on. And it's not this simple, if you lose, people used to talk about lose 10% of your body weight, and that would actually lead to, it was thought, positive changes in health. And yet I think we know now it's not that simple, and it's not necessarily the weight. A lot of times it's just people who engage in more activity more regularly, right? So it's the activity or the behavior may actually be leading to improvements in health, but it's not necessarily weight dependent. So these issues are pretty complicated, and I think we have to be really careful not to oversimplify and to think that if I do A, then B is what's going to happen, because as we get more advanced research, I think we see that it's just more complicated. And perhaps one of the issues that's also relevant that has been really important to me and something that's fascinated me across my career is that even if you think that weight loss would be important to your health, we know that there is virtually nothing people do that leads to sustained weight loss. So we have to really think about what is even possible, right? So if you want to, or if your doctor really has compelling evidence that weight loss would be important to your health for whatever reason, then the next question even is it even possible? And I think most of the dieting literature now for several decades has suggested that most people gain back any weight they lose. And in fact, they often gain back more weight. And in the interim, they can literally damage their metabolism, develop disordered eating. There are costs to even embarking on some of these changes in behaviors.
Right.
So I think I unpacked most elements of that, but let me know if I left something out.
No, thank you so much for answering that question. And yes, it is very complicated. So the answer is complicated, and we could probably have a whole episode on it, as I'm sure, Ashley and I have touched on so many
Mhm.
other, in other episodes, we've tried to kind of tackle this topic. One of the important things I always try to remind clients, and we've talked about it on the show, is, how important it is to be a critical consumer of the research, because what we really never see are certain things controlled for, like, the fact that when folks experience weight stigma, they're less likely to go to the doctor, they're less likely to use preventative services. So that's going to impact health, of course. Even less likely to engage in movement,
Hmm.
experiencing weight discrimination and weight stigma.
Hmm.
And so there are so many other factors at play that impact health that don't really have to do with weight. They have to do with all of these other factors at play.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, adding on to that, I would like to talk about the concept that you explain in your book called embodiment, um, and talk about. I'm curious if people might be surprised to hear if our bodies do change, that body image doesn't necessarily change. And I remember, I feel like I was in my early 20s. Do you all remember Al Roker on the
Yeah.
Today Show, maybe?
Hmm.
He went through this huge body transformation, this huge change, and he actually wrote a book about this too, about how even though his body changed, the state of his mental health did not. And that was very shocking and surprising to him. And so I'm curious, Charlotte, if you can touch on that. Again, I think you have this concept called embodiment, but what does that mean for us? Because I think so many of us might get stuck there. Like, wait, what? I thought weight loss or my changing body was supposed to fix everything, you know?
Well, it's no wonder so many people think that, though, right? So
Right.
much of the messaging that we experience suggests that if you lose just 5 pounds, or you buy a certain cosmetic,
Hmm.
or you undergo some kind of cosmetic procedure, or
Hmm.
whatever it may be, right?
Hmm.
All of these things will not just change your appearance, but you will be happier, you will be
Yeah.
more like popular, you will get a new
Yeah.
job, you will, right? I mean, the
Right.
the messaging and advertisement for all of this is just really extensive, because
Yeah.
so much money is to be made off of stoking all of our insecurity and leading us all to feel like we are projects. We need to fix
Yeah.
ourselves. This is a
Yeah.
never-ending project.
Yeah.
And the data doesn't back it up that changing ourselves um, necessarily does improve our mental health or improve our body image.
Hmm.
Um, in some cases, it may, of course, but I think, lasting improvements in mental health usually come from really internal work, not external work, so to speak.
Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
could you tell us more about this concept of embodiment that you write about in your book?
Yeah, so embodiment is probably more overlapping with my broader view of body image than many people's, and is sometimes defined as comfortably living in your body,
Yeah.
experiencing your body to its fullest.
Yeah.
Um, it's a sense of comfort, but also empowerment in your body. So
Yeah.
feeling agentic, right? It's not just that you're like a passive recipient of messaging or experiences, but that you feel like your body is a source of power in this world,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
So it's a really cool and really very broad body image concept as well.
Hmm.
Mhm. I have a question, because I'm thinking about so many of the clients I've worked with in eating disorder treatment, and body image work is almost always a part of it.
Yeah.
And one of the things we run into invariably is the fact that so many of us have friends or family members, like, we're working on our body image, but sometimes the people around us have a really hard time just not commenting or not talking about their own bodies, the bodies of others, just really any kind of like, there can be like body shaming and things like that. I love your book because it has so much practical advice. Would you be able to share a little bit about what we can do in the moment if we have relationships and this happens, or what do we do with these relationships in general?
This can be so tricky,
Mhm.
right? Because we don't want to confront our friends or family members typically and tell them what we're really thinking in these moments because we don't want to damage the relationship, right?
Mhm.
And the flip side of that is that there's actually research to suggest that what we sometimes in this area of literature refer to as fat talk, right? Like talking in a disparaging way about our bodies with other people. And this is engaged in more often by girls and women than boys and men. Um, but that females tend to view it as like a way to bond almost with one
Mhm.
another. And
Mhm.
yet it doesn't have a positive impact on body image, right? So all
Mhm.
that, no, you're not. Yes, I am. No, you're beautiful. It doesn't actually make anyone feel better, right?
Mhm.
We're socialized to think that this is like female behavior, female conversation. And yet the literature does not bear out that it's helpful to us.
Mhm.
And so I think because we feel like, or we maybe are in the habit of talking about these things or hearing about these things in conversation in a certain way, it can feel very strange to think like, actually, I don't want to do this anymore, right? And how do I let people know I don't want to do this anymore?
Mhm.
um,
Right.
and sometimes it can be helpful just to warn people in advance, right? So with like the holidays coming up, to send people a text and say, have been having a hard time, or this is what I've been
Mhm.
working on. Can we try to avoid discussion of A, B, and C, however you
Mhm.
articulate that?
Mhm.
Um, and also sometimes it can be good, just, change the subject, right?
Mhm.
You don't have to
Yeah.
confront it in the moment if that's not your style, just change the subject.
Mhm.
Um, it always makes me think of my grandmother when she was still alive. If she just didn't want to talk about something, she would just very dramatically be like, "Isn't this lovely weather we're having?" Like we all knew what was going on.
Change the subject.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whenever I offer that advice, I can't help but think of her.
Yeah.
Um,
Very wise. Very wise
but
woman.
like it could be
Mhm.
pouring, and she'd be like, "Look at how great this weather is." um, or I think more power to you if you are at a place where you can say, "Listen, I'm sure you don't mean anything by this, but talking about what you're eating or your diet or your clothes or my body or your body or whatever's come up is just kind of difficult for me. Do you mind if we change the subject?" Right. So in
Mhm.
some ways it perhaps is most adaptive just to be able to say that. But I even have a hard time doing that. And this is what I do for a living. So I don't fault
Mhm.
Mhm.
anyone else if you just can't do it. But like I said, more power to you if you are comfortable enough or the moment strikes you and you can just say it.
Mhm.
Thanks for validating that. It is hard. I mean, it's really hard to set boundaries with the people you care about. And I've worked with some clients where also I think the question comes up like, is that, is this a relationship that is worth continuing?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, especially if you have maybe a friend who it just can't seem to stop talking about, their bodies or your
Mhm.
body, um, or they're not respecting the boundaries that you put in place.
I guess my thought is more from years of living than any specific research evidence. But I do think that friends and people in our lives sometimes have different places at different times. And
Yeah.
so if you're either recovering from an eating disorder or really trying to work on these issues and have someone in your life that's just not helping, right? I don't think you need to eliminate that relationship necessarily, but maybe you need space, right?
Mhm.
And you may feel like you want to articulate that or you may not. My personal
Mhm.
style would probably be just to, try to not spend as much time with that person for a little bit until I was in a better place.
Mhm.
But I guess in my experience, sometimes then it's like, the next year or a couple years later, you may both find yourself with either a shared interest or, your kids are both now going to the same high school or in the same activity, and you want to be able to connect with and enjoy that person in a different context at a different time. And so, um, as long as that person's not being malicious, isn't trying to
Mhm.
purposely be damaging,
Right.
Mhm.
I think oftentimes just so many people struggle with these issues. And
Yeah.
so in many cases, it's not about you, it's about them.
Mm,
And yes, we have to have boundaries and protect ourselves, but um, that person may need you later or you may need them later or
Yeah.
want that
Yeah.
relationship.
yeah.
So I feel like, be careful maybe, how confrontational to be too. Sometimes it may be generous just to step away a little bit and then
Yeah.
hope you can step back later.
Yeah.
I know it always helps me when, if someone in my life is talking about their body in a negative way or making negative comments about the body of a celebrity or something like that, it always helps me just to have compassion for them. It's like,
Hmm.
wow, like this is a peek into what goes on in their head
Yeah,
and
Mhm.
how they're probably feeling about themselves, like feeling
Mhm.
shame or feeling, I mean, body image can be like all consuming. I mean,
absolutely.
yeah, and sometimes it just helps when I think to myself, wow, like they must really be suffering with a lot of thoughts like this, and that's
Yeah.
hard.
Right. So like I
Yeah,
said, it's more about them probably than
right.
than you sometimes.
Exactly.
And if you really are convinced of that too, that may be a window to try to say, are you okay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's such a good
Like,
point.
is there some support I could maybe help you get?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or this is what I've been doing that's been helping me. Like, is there something that you need right now?
I love that.
I always tell my clients when we're kind of in this space to just embrace the awkward.
Mm,
And if
mm-hmm.
they and I think, Charlotte, you mentioned your personal style, and I think mine would be, if I had something to say, or if I really wanted to, would just be to come out with like, okay, I'm going to be awkward. I'm just going to say it right now, like, and just kind of put that on the forefront. But I do think with this topic, relationships are so complex, and even talking about boundaries, I mean, it's such a nuanced thing, and there's really not a black or white way to approach it, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've just definitely seen people sometimes, I think, get advice about boundaries and interpret that in a very black or white
Yeah.
way
Yeah.
and think like I just have to cut this out of my
Right.
life. And in some cases, of course, that may be what's best.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I guess I get a little bit worried too about people just sort of starting to cut everything out
Right.
because that becomes maladaptive also.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. Okay, so relationships. Let's move to social media.
Mm.
Circling back, Sam, to that
Oh my
topic.
gosh. Yeah, so
Um,
much to talk about.
I know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Charlotte, we're just curious from your perspective, what is social media doing to our body image? Are there ways we can protect ourselves without deleting all of our apps? I do also, like, I feel like we hear sometimes like social media is so bad. And I do want to say that I have some really fun connections on social media too, so there's this
Yeah.
give and take, but yeah, we'd love to hear your perspective.
So here's another place where there is a lot of nuance,
Yeah.
right? That there is a growing body of research looking at social media and body image and social media and mental health more generally. And I think that sort of as a group of studies right now, we have hundreds of studies at this point. We can say that social media presents a risk factor. It's a
Hmm.
risk
Hmm.
for body image and mental health more broadly. Some of my own work suggests that it really does depend. How are you using social media?
Hmm.
Right. So I'm guessing that you guys, if you're on social media, your news feeds look like mine. And it's like we have, I have like middle-aged mom memes and body positive stuff and mental health advocates and, I mean, stuff that's like generally pretty positive,
Yeah.
unless people are like complaining about their kids or their jobs or whatever, but like in good fun.
Yeah.
And so, um, not that there isn't some potential damage to be done just even by spending a lot of time engaged with social media, because it can be such a time suck. Um,
Hmm.
but I think we have to be careful not to think of it in terms of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater,
Hmm.
because I've also connected with many, many people in our field
Hmm.
via social media. And
Hmm.
there's even a few people that it feels a little strange to say, but like we've never met in person, but we message each other, we've Zoomed, we've talked on the phone, we've
Hmm.
emailed,
Hmm.
that we've helped each other out as professionals, but really as friends
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
this point.
Hmm.
And so I do think that depending on how you use it, and we know these are algorithm driven forms of media, so we do get some control over how it's used.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and of course, where this gets really complicated is in thinking about young people and what our responsibility as adults in the lives of young people is. And um, and that's why I talk about this a lot in all of the books, frankly, that I've
Hmm.
written, because we want to think about it in terms of preparing, I think, young people to be media literate consumers of social
Yeah.
media. Because even if we're able to, let's say, keep our kids off of social media or away from phones until they're 13, 14, 15, God bless you if you make it to 16. Um, even if we can delay some of the inevitable, once then they're exposed, we need them to know how to parse what they're seeing,
Yeah.
how to make good choices,
Yeah.
and how to know, um, what looks real and what is not.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to think about, some avoidance for young people, some critical use,
Hmm.
you know, education, engagement, the, but just, completely making it off limits is probably never going to happen.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
We have to think about what's realistic here. And I don't
Yeah.
think social media is going anywhere anytime soon. And when it's used for connection, can be really beneficial,
Yeah.
but if you're using it to compare yourself or self-objectify and all of that can really be
Yeah,
harmful. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
When I'm working with clients in eating disorder recovery, social media is always part of the conversation. And there's research I'm familiar with about cutting back on social media or even taking a 1 week break
yeah,
that can
uh-huh.
have really positive benefits on mental health and wellness. And I often share those studies with clients and I'm like, hey, like, look at this. I wonder what even just taking a day break might be or cutting back. And it's so interesting because one of the things I hear so often, the number one reason why people don't want to take a break is FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yes.
Yeah,
You talk about this in your book. I was hoping you
yeah,
could share a little bit about
yeah.
FOMO and you know, how can we manage FOMO when it comes to social media?
So it's true. There's more than one study now looking at social media breaks of about a week. And
Hmm.
they do suggest that a week or so away is good for these participants, or was good for these participants' mental health and body image. In my lab, we actually just did a study over the summer that we haven't been able to publish yet, looking at a 3-week break. So
Mm.
I'm hoping that that's an extension of that work.
Mhm.
But there is this study also looking at FOMO in particular that shows that people who take these breaks maybe at first feel some of that, but ultimately do not, right?
It
That
goes
Wow.
away.
it does sort of
Wow.
seem to dissipate a bit, because I think, in so many ways, the checking and the looking and it becomes kind of a compulsion for a lot
Mhm.
of people,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I've even experienced this myself, right? Like if I have a slower day, like I start checking more, I'm playing around on my phone, right? If I'm really busy and I don't look for a whole day, like I don't even think about it then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think what is surprising in some of these research findings is that even though people are resistant initially because they are afraid of missing out or not connecting with other people that they care about, that a lot of times they don't really end up missing it nearly that much. And there are other ways to connect, right? So
Yeah.
if it's truly going to be better for your mental health to not be on social media or to be on it a lot less, um, this is what like chat groups are for, right?
Yeah. I'm
Right.
actually encouraged to hear that so not being on it for a week, you are seeing, or research is showing, that then folks are not as experiencing as much FOMO, I guess. Like it's
Yeah,
that's so great.
That's really
yeah,
good to know. I'm
I
going to share
know. I'm
that
like,
also.
I need to
Yeah.
take
yeah,
that into
Yeah.
my brain, because
Because
I've had
maybe
those
at
moments
maybe at
too. Yeah.
first it's like uncomfortable, but you
yeah,
can just remind yourself, like, just need to hang in there because
Yeah.
right.
hopefully it'll go away a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
do often, when I get in that moment, I think about, which I know honestly children these days don't have this ability to do this, but I think about a time growing up when I was in like middle and high school, when I literally thought about this driving my daughter to school today, where if I skipped school or didn't go to school for a day, maybe I didn't feel well, I was so excited to go back the next day to like engage in that connection with them. And I did miss them, my friends, but it was like it was this eagerness and excitement to reconnect. And I think I was thinking about that this morning, like there's so many ways now because of social media, because of the phones and apps and all that jazz, for us to stay connected. And so I bet that break does do something really positive for us. And that, I mean, it's great to hear that we don't focus on the FOMO or the missing out as much if we take that break. I think
yeah,
that's wonderful.
yeah, yeah. And I think too, we don't have to look at it as you're on or you're off always,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I also have talked with many people in eating disorder recovery or who've experienced other mental health problems, and we talk about, what if you just take like a short break, like a
Right.
week
Mm.
or like even a
Yeah.
month, right? Like
Yeah.
just start checking less, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be helpful too. It doesn't have to be like, I'm never going to engage with this again.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. It doesn't have to be all or nothing.
right, right. Or
Yeah.
certain apps people like
Yeah.
more than others, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes people, even my students will sometimes say, like, I'm not on TikTok, it just started taking up too much time,
Mhm.
right? Like Instagram, I can check faster and I'll just do that instead. Or,
Mhm.
so it is really interesting when young adults will sort of set their own boundaries sometimes and
Mhm.
tell me about it. Like, I'm just happier if I'm not doing that, or it
Mhm.
detracts from studying or whatever. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I have another question, Charlotte. Um, Body image and clothing. This
Mm.
happens to be one of my favorite subjects because I love clothing. I love fashion. I think it's so much fun figuring out how to dress my body. And so I am just curious of your thoughts on this. How does clothing impact our body image? And how can clothing help or hinder our relationship with our bodies?
So there's some really kind of classic research on this subject that
Mhm.
suggests that when we are less comfortable in what we're wearing, that's truly distracting from our ability to engage
Mhm.
with the world. And so
Mhm.
I think one of the things that I like to remind people is that clothes are meant to, keep us warm, cover us in ways that we deem socially acceptable, and be comfortable. And I like
Mhm.
clothes too. So I think it's
Mhm.
fine to like them and to enjoy them and to try to be fashionable
Mhm.
but also to try to pick clothes that do their job, right? And
Mhm.
and that means protecting us, keeping us warm, covering what we want to cover,
Mhm.
and not distracting us, right? And
Yes.
and I think I use the example of shoes in the book, right? That there are so
Mhm.
many shoes that do a terrible job of being shoes because you can hardly walk in them.
Mhm.
And then if you can't walk in your shoes, right? And I think so many women have had this experience. I know I have, where you have really cute shoes, but they have a high heel or there's something uncomfortable about them, and you wear them for something special. And then like you just spend so much of the time at this event thinking about how much your feet hurt.
Just
Yes.
regretting what you've done.
Yes.
Right.
Why
You
did I do
know?
this to myself?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this isn't to say that we should never have cute shoes, but right, like how do we kind of maybe, balance feeling like we're presenting ourselves in an attractive way, but also, like able to walk at the event
Right.
we're going
Right.
Yeah,
to,
of
right?
course.
So it's
Yeah.
okay for us to have, um, quote unquote, let the clothes just do their job kind of days. Does that make sense?
Totally, totally. And some of the terminology I love in thinking about this is, are we making adaptive or maladaptive appearance investments, right? And
Yeah.
so, and that's not a strict dichotomy and it's not the same for everyone, but right, like if you're investing a little bit of time in what you're going to wear because you're going to something special, great, that's probably perfectly adaptive. There's nothing wrong with
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
But if you're spending so much time and you're wearing shoes you can't walk in and you're
Yeah.
uncomfortable and you can't concentrate at your job because of, whatever you squeezed yourself into, then that's probably a maladaptive investment in your appearance because it's actually
Mhm.
distracting from your quality of life.
And it
Yeah.
probably increases anxiety
And
because
stress.
you're stressed. You're spending so much time, taking everything out of the closet and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I work with a lot of alums in recovery who are doing well, and they'll come on the podcast and tell their story, or they'll come to a group and tell their story for folks to hear. And so many of them, I want to say almost all, say that then when they realized comfortable, well-fitting clothes actually, you know, they really felt like it was a game changer once they discovered that. It was like, oh, you mean when I feel physically good in my clothes and they fit and they do their job, as you say, it was like one of the biggest shifts in their body image. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
such an important reminder for anyone
Yeah.
who's struggling. You don't have to have an eating disorder, obviously, to struggle with body image. So, but yeah, to
Yeah.
prioritize your comfort.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. I one of my favorite things is sizing up, and because it does increase the comfort and and in my brain maybe years ago I was taught, again, like I had to be a certain size or whatever. And this now gives me freedom to just exist and to just be, and I
Mm.
don't worry about it. I don't tug at my clothes all day long, and I'm not distracted, and so anyway, I love that tip
Yeah.
and that tool. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I mean, clothes and fashion have evolved in some really cool ways. The
Yeah.
pandemic kind of pushed this along, right? Where there's
Yeah.
so many, I think, really cute clothes that are like elastic waist and stretchy, and, you know, you can wear sweatpants almost anywhere now. There are cute
Mhm.
sweatpants. I mean, I, I think that I mean, I'm just like love this part of fashion these days where it's kind of
Mm.
like athleisure-y, comfort is allowed more and more.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love it. One last question, Charlotte, before we wrap up. I know we're running out of time. Exercise, movement, and body
Mm.
image. What's the connection? What do you think our audience should know?
So exercise can be so good for both our mental and physical health. And it can be a really good way to think about our bodies in terms of their functionality and not just their appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, where we have to be careful is in sort of how we frame our approach to exercise, in
Mm-hmm.
that it shouldn't be punishment, it shouldn't be obligatory. It should be hopefully movement we enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in order to sustain some sort of exercise, which is, like I said, if you're physically capable, good for your mental and physical health, it's best to engage in something that you like, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that people who start regimens, like, especially at the beginning of a new year or something, right? This is why everyone like gets their gym membership, and then 2 weeks later, no one's going anymore because guess what? They don't like going to the gym, it turns out.
Yeah, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
this is horrible. I don't want to keep
Right.
doing
I
this.
don't actually want to go
Yeah.
to the gym, right? But do you like going on a walk with a friend? Do you like going to a dance class with a friend or a partner, right? I mean, there are so many ways that we can move our bodies and feel joy in them. It can be an
Mm-hmm.
important part of appreciating our bodies and developing a positive body image.
Mm-hmm. Charlotte, thank you so much. I feel like we could talk for another
I
hour.
know, I know,
I
But
same.
know. So
yeah, but
much to share.
we really appreciate you coming on the show. And to our listeners, thank you again for joining us for another episode, and we will talk next time.